Okay, Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome. This is a very special evening because it's been 18 months or so since we've given a shiur in the synagogue. Like, we give stuff, we talk before, Divrei Torah here and there, but an official shiur, it's been quite a bit of time. And we are testing the hybrid model. That's what we're doing right now. You got the hybrid cars that work on electricity and gas, so we have a hybrid shiur working in person and Zoom as well. And my fellow rabbinical colleagues all around the world, I've seen them, they're already starting to go back to the synagogue and give the shiur. The hybrid model, I think, works. I think a lot of people are okay at home and some like the comfort of their homes, but I think it cannot replace ever the face-to-face interaction that I'm having with you guys here. Thank you for joining this evening. Yes, it is still being recorded, and it is will be uploaded on our podcast after the shiur is done. Tonight's shiur, our pre-Yom Kippur shiur, is dedicated and sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Robert Stein in memory of his father's first nachala, which is tonight, Chaim ben Moshe Zichrono Livracha, who passed away on Erev Yom Kippur. Now, if you ask yourself the following question, what do you think the most crucial part of Yom Kippur is? Or what is the most important part of Yom Kippur? I think there will probably be a range of three answers. You will have some people that will say Ne'ilah, the end. Everything goes according to the end. Many people just show up for the end, and that's why they consider it for them the most important. Others might say the beginning, the Kal Nidre. No question, is a very, very holy, momentous part of the service at the beginning. However, the avodah, the seder ha'avodah that takes place during Musaf is no doubt up there. And if not, I would probably vouch to say is the most important part of the Yom Kippur service. Because what the Kohen Gadol did during his whole avodah, from beginning to, it really began from the moment the sun rose. That day, it was non-stop. You couldn't go to sleep. It was non-stop. And what we read during Musaf really is the whole process of what the Kohen Gadol did. But knowing and confirming that he had the responsibility, he bared the responsibility of the atonement of all of Klal Yisrael. Not only did he have to bring korban for himself, but there was the tzibur, that the whole atonement, their whole kapara was dependent on the success of his avodah. So when we get to that moment on Musaf of Yom Kippur, it's long, and at that point you're starting to feel the hunger pangs a little bit. But we have to really stop and think, that this is a special time, and I believe that it's right up there with the Ne'ilah, with the Kal Nidre, and with all that comes with the day. I want to focus tonight on one aspect of that avodah. And in preparation for the holiest day of the year, which will be tomorrow night, one of the most fascinating aspects of the Seder Avodah that the Kohen Gadol does in the Kodesh HaKodashim, the only time any person ever walks into that room, which is on Yom Kippur, which is the sprinkling of the blood. It's Hazaot, the sprinkling of the blood of the atonement offerings. You have the bull of the Kohen Gadol, and then you have the goat, the male goat, the he-goat of the Jewish people. And the Kohen would sprinkle the blood in a very unique way. And this way of sprinkling is not duplicated at any other time during the year. And the sprinkling is done one sprinkle upwards, followed by 7 sprinkles downwards. And when he would count, to make sure that he's got the right amount, when he would count the sprinklings, he would precede every one with the number 1. So this is what the Mishnah says in Masechet Yoma. Natal et hadam mimi shaya memares bo. He took the blood from the person who was mixing it so that it didn't congeal. Nichnas lemakom shenichnas. He entered the place, which is the Kodesh HaKodashim. Ve'amad b'makom she'amad. And he stood where he had stood, which is in between the poles of the ark, where he was already before. Ve'izah mimenu. And then he sprinkled achat lemala ve'sheva lemata. Once upwards, 7 downwards. Ve'kach haya moneh. And this is how he used to count. Achat, 1. Achat ve'achat, 1 and 1. Achat ve'shtayim, achat ve'shalosh, achat ve'arba, achat ve'chamesh, achat ve'shesh, achat ve'sheva. And we repeat this a lot during when we recite the Seder Avodah. This is what we say. So we have here 3 questions that I want to go over with you tonight. We want to try to understand, number 1, what is the significance of sprinkling 1 upwards and 7 downwards? That's number 1. Number 2, why did the Kohen precede the count for each downward sprinkle with the number 1? Right? 1. Then you should have said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, it was 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4. Why repeat the 1? And now, and also, since we're dealing with this whole number 7 in downward sprinkles, maybe we can try to understand why the whole Ne'ilah service concludes with Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem, and then 7 times Hashem Hu Elokim. We say 7 times Hashem Hu Elokim. So I want to present to you 3 explanations, beautiful explanations, on why the Kohen Gadol sprinkled once upwards and 7 downwards. And the first one is from the Maharal Miprag. And there, he, in his Sefer, he invokes a very famous principle that appears many times in his works and also in other Sefarim. The idea that the number 7 represents the natural world, which was, of course, created in 7 days. And the number 8 represents that which is supernatural. It is 1 above 7. And he explains in his Sefarim that Yom Kippur is a day where we abstain from all worldly pleasures, all natural pursuits. There's nothing natural about the day because we're trying to stay away from the things that are natural to us, like eating and smearing creams on our body, and wearing leather shoes. All this stuff is we do naturally day to day, and on Yom Kippur we abstain. And when the Kohen Gadol enters the Kodesh HaKodashim on Yom Kippur, it is the most supernatural place. That's the place where nothing makes sense. Even the dimensions, the Chachamim tells, the dimensions of the Aron makes no sense, how it would even fit in that space. And it's over there that he would sprinkle once upwards and 7 downwards. 1 plus 7 totals 8. And therefore, that represents a supernatural. That's the explanation of the Maharal Miprag. Another very famous explanation is that brought down by the Rama. The Rama, and not only was he known for the edits in the Shulchan Aruch representing much of the Ashkenazi halacha, but the Rama was also a huge Kabbalist. And he says that the once upwards, the sprinkle upwards, represents the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination. That good inclination that pushes a person upwards towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the 7 downwards represents the evil inclination. The Yetzer Hara that we're going to see soon has 7 names. Has 7 names to it, which correspond to 7 forces that actually drag a person down into sin. And that's why the Kohen Gadol, says that Rama, combines the once upwards with the 7 downwards in order to elevate those 7 forces of the evil inclination to be joined with the good inclination. And I quote you his words. He says, Kvar noda hazaot Yom Kippurim shehi achat lemala v'sheva lemata. We already know on Yom Kippur it's 1 sprinkle upwards and 7 down. Ve'atam, the reason is shayu romzim al inyan yetzer hara. This is alluding to the whole concept of the evil inclination. Hamachati Adam, which causes man to sin. Vehu nikra b'shiva shemot. And there's 7 names to this. ולכן היה זורק 7 הזעות למטה, ואחת למעלה כשהוא נגד יצר הטוב. He would sprinkle 7 downwards and 1 upwards. Upwards is neged the good inclination. And with every sprinkle that he would sprinkle downwards, he would always recall the one that he sprinkled upwards. It would be achat ve'achat, achat ve'shtayim, achat ve'shalosh. Lehorot, to teach us, ki min hara'ui leshatef yetzer hara im yetzer hatov. In order to combine, to bring together the yetzer hara and the yetzer hatov, ve'ashneim ke'echad tovim, so that both are good. And that's how he would throw. And this is also in line with how Rashi explains. So we'll see later. Bechol levavecha uchol nafshecha. We've spoken about in the past. Levavecha is really a plural form, and Rashi says bishnei yetzarecha. We have a commandment to love God with your good inclination and your evil inclination. It's having the good inclination pull out the evil inclination to work together to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu in one. And this is what's happening over here. So this is the words of the Holy Ramah. And the third explanation is that of the Sefat Emet. And the Sefat Emet has a beautiful chidush, quoting from the Zohar. And he says that the root of all spiritual revelations, which are the 7 clouds of glory, and those 7 clouds of glory are actually revealed on Sukkot, which the holiday of Sukkot corresponds to the Ananei Kavod. The root of all that is the service, the avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur at the time that he enters the Kodesh HaKodashim. So according to Sfat Emet, the whole sprinkling process in the Kodesh HaKodashim is as follows. The once upwards represents Yom Kippur, the day where all the Jews are uplifted, like we said, above all worldly matters. And the Tur writes famously that the reason why we say the pasuk Baruch Shem Kevod Machuto Leolam Va'ed out loud on Yom Kippur is because we're like angels. We're like angels on Yom Kippur, and angels don't whisper. Angels recite everything out loud. That's a 1 time upwards. And the 7 times downwards is representing the 7 days of Sukkot, which is a very much earthly holiday where we find ourselves in this world. We eat and we drink and we sleep in the sukkah. It's here. So through the sprinkling of once upwards and 7 times downwards, the Kohen Gadol is drawing from the holiness of Yom Kippur and injecting it into the holiday that's about to come after Yom Kippur, that being Sukkot, which is the 7 times downwards, 7 days of the holiday of Sukkot. And if you work hard, you can actually find a way to merge all of these 3 explanations, which can actually allow us to learn we're going to see life lessons, something that we can actually take with us from this in our service of Hashem, in our Avodat Hashem for our entire life. The Gemara Masechet Sukkah says that based on like the Ramah mentioned above, there are 7 names to the Yetzer Hara. Shiva Shemot Yesh Lo Yetzer Hara. You want to know what they are? I'll tell you what they are. And there's a different person called the Yetzer Hara something else. The first one is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is not a person. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kera'o Ra. He called it Ra, evil. That's how he called the Yetzer Hara. Moshe Kera'o Arel. Moshe called it Arel, like uncircumcised. David Kera'o Tameh. Shlomo Kera'o Soneh. Yishaya Kera'o Michshol. Yechezkel Kera'o Eben. Yoel Kera'o Tzefoni. Okay, so this is the 7 different names of the Yetzer Hara brought down Masechet Sukkah. And the Ramah explains, like we said before, that the 7 names of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, correspond to the 7 physical forces of the world, which correspond to the 7 days of the creation. And this evil inclination that surrounds us every single day makes use of these negative forces and drags a person downwards. That's its whole job. That's its whole mission, is to bring a person downwards. Our job is to overpower the kochot of the Yetzer Hara, to overpower the evil inclination using our Yetzer Hatov, our good inclination, and that is our mission in this world. And interestingly enough, What does Shlomo HaMelech write in Sefer Mishleh? Sheva yipol tzadik vekam. A righteous man falls 7 times and he gets up. Why did Dafka use 7? Because again, there's this notion of 7 forces constantly trying to pull us back, but our job is vekam, that tzaddik will always get up even after 7 times. A deeper understanding of the Ramah is that these 7 forces correspond to the 7 character traits which HaKadosh Baruch Hu used to create the world. You've probably heard them before. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. It's part of the Sfirot, the lower 7 Sefirot of God. And these 7 traits correspond to the 7 days of creation. They correspond to the 7 days of the week, the 7 years in the Shemitah cycle, which we're starting now, which we just started, the 7 Shemitot in the Yovel cycle, 7,000 years that the world exists. It's all these seven midot of God. Now, God even created human beings with these 7 traits for us to use in our service of Hashem. Chesed, number 1. Chesed, to do kindness with all creations and to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of love, with love. Gevurah, number 2. To overpower the Yetzer Hara and serve God out of fear. That's what Gevurah. Tiferet. Tiferet is to glorify oneself with Torah. Tiferet is a combination of both. The Torah is a combination of Chesed and Gevurah. Service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu only. This is Yaakov. Chesed was Abraham. Gevurah was Yitzchak. Tiferet is Yaakov. Netzach. Netzach is to come out victorious over a person's Yetzer Hara. Hod is to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all the good that He's given us. Yesod is to bind oneself with God, an unbreakable knot. And lastly is Malchut, which is to declare HaKadosh Baruch Hu as King with all our body, all 248 limbs and 365 sinews. But the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, with all of its power, with its 7 names, has the 7 forces of impurity, like we said, which fight against all these 7 traits and try to, God forbid, derail a person off the train tracks, off of his service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, causing him to, God forbid, use these traits for averot and not for mitzvot, or at least at the very least, not for the purpose of serving God, but maybe even for personal pleasure. So when we think about the sprinkling of the Kohen Gadol in the Kodesh HaKodashim, achat lemala v'sheva lemata, once upwards and 7 downwards. This is exactly what's happening over here. The Zohar actually tells us something unbelievable. He teaches us that Abraham Avinu, before going down to Mitzrayim, he was told to go down to Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim was the most immoral land that ever existed. He tied himself to a rope, and this rope was the rope of emunah. He needed to tie himself to a rope, the emunah, to Hashem above, so that he would not fall into the pool of impurity in Mitzrayim. And by tying himself to a rope, he would be able to exit out in peace, without sin. And the Zohar actually writes that because of this, Abraham Avinu was able to cling to his emunah when he descended to Egypt, and when he went to Eretz Pelishtim. And the mashal that the Zohar brings is like a man who wants to descend into a deep pit. And he was afraid that he wasn't able to get out. So he ties a rope around his body. And he said, once now I have this rope around me, I can now descend into the pit. So Abraham Avinu, same idea. I'm about to enter a pit of evil. That's Mitzrayim. That's Pelishtim. So he tied a knot of emunah around him, fastened it to his body, and then was able to descend. And now, again, the case with Mitzrayim and Pelishtim. This week's parasha, actually, we say a very famous pasuk. Ki chelek Adonai amo, Yaakov chever nachalato. God's chelek, God's share, Rashi says, is amo, is his nation. That's like God's personal belonging. Am Yisrael. Yaakov chever nachalato. Yaakov, the portion of his possession. And the Chachamim explained that every Jew has to make Hashem his chelek, just like God makes you his chelek. We're connected by a rope. We're connected by a very, very strong rope. And being that the soul that is embodied, that is inside of us, is a portion of God himself. So therefore, a person, us, flesh and blood, standing here on earth, we have to have the mindset that we are connected by a rope, by a chevel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu above. And this is the idea. This makes sense. Our rabbis tell us that the word teva, nature, comes from the same shoresh as tovea. Tovea means drowning. A person who's drowning, we say he's tovea bayam. Because a person who's immersed in only worldly pleasures drowns himself. And he can't get out. He's in a pit. And he's stuck because everything around him is tum'ah. He's drowning in a river. And if it wasn't for that rope that is tied around him, pulling him out, connected to God, we would drown. We would drown. Shiviti Hashem ne'edi tamid kirini balemot. David HaMelech says, I've set Hashem before me always. I constantly see Him. I'm constantly not actually see Him, but I recognize His presence at all times. And that's so kimimini balemot. He's at my right hand. He's always to my right. He's always there to help me. If I'm falling and I'm in the depths of all immorality and all sin, I'll get pulled out. So now we go back to the sprinkling of the Kohen Gadol and the Kodesh Kodashim. Achat lemala v'sheva lemata. The main task of a Jew in life is to connect himself with a bond, but not just any bond, a deep bond, a strong bond to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the spirit of achat lemala. One upwards. That is my connection. That's my chevel. It's one upwards. And by doing so, I am zocheh, I merit to stabilize the sheva lemata. I stabilize myself, the 7 below, the 7 downwards, enabling a person, us, our 7 traits of chesed, gevurah, netza, all these 7 traits that we have, that we're created with, I can stabilize them in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even if, God forbid, chas v'shalom, the Yetzer Hara does win, is victorious over us, and succeeds, using those 7 names are going to try to combat those 7 traits, even if he does so, it's okay. Because I'm going to grab that rope. I have the rope that is tied around me, and I'm going to pull myself up back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the reason why Yom Kippur, the day of forgiveness, of atonement of all Am Yisrael, the Kohen Gadol sprinkles in that fashion. Achat lemala v'sheva lemata. The sprinkling served to atone all of Klal Yisrael, but not just a stam atoning. It's the root of the sin. The lack that I'm tied, the lack of me being tied to God. I forgot to tie the rope. That's the problem. So I'm sprinkling upwards. The Kohen Gadol is sprinkling upwards to be metaken that. That was your sin. You weren't tied upwards. So I'm sprinkling upwards, which now allows us that even if we were to descend into the trap of the Yetzer Hara, the 7 times downwards, at least I'm protected. And where does he do it? He does it in the holiest place on earth in existence. Because it's there where you're able to draw out, where he's able to draw out the highest level of holiness and connect and connected to Am Yisrael, allowing them to be connected through that Kedusha for the rest of the year, allowing them the ability to lift themselves up from the Sheva Lemata, from the 7 times downwards, and connecting it with the 1 upwards. And that is in essence what the Maharal really wanted to say, like we said in the beginning. The 8 total sprinklings represent this idea, this notion of supernatural. The holiness of Yom Kippur is something that we've never experienced before, something that only the Kohen Gadol can really feel at that moment, and specifically at that moment in the Kodesh HaKodashim. It's supernatural. It's above anything else we've ever seen. Above all the natural world in the 7 days of creation, what takes place in that room. And that's because his whole kavanah, his whole intent at that time during that service was to connect Am Yisrael to the supernatural worlds by connecting that rope. He's representing Klal Yisrael at that moment, nobody else. And he protects us from falling into the seven forces of the natural world. And that also makes sense with the Ramah. What the Ramah said, the one upwards represents a good inclination, the seven downwards represents an evil inclination, and the seven forces that want to drag a person down. And this also makes sense, of course, to the Sfat Emet, with the sprinkling of the blood. The Kohen Gadol wanted to draw again from Yom Kippur, once upwards, because the holy day of Yom Kippur, and bring it down into the 7 days of Sukkot, which is Sheva Lemata. Achat Lemala v'Sheva Lemata. The 7 days of Sukkot, which are around the corner, Be'ezrat Hashem, not coincidentally, we welcome the 7 guests, the 7 shepherds, the Ushpizin, on every day of Sukkot. And each one of these holy individuals are revealed, each one of them according to one of these 7 character traits. Like we said, Abraham was Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevurah, Yaakov is Tiferet, Moshe is Netzach, Aharon is Hod, Yosef is Yesod, and David is Malchut. So the 7 guests that you're bringing on Sukkot all stem from that Yom Kippur service. Achat Lemala, Yom Kippur was the top, was the root. Sheva Lemata, that gave the berachat to 7 days of Sukkot, according to the Sfat Emet. So Yom Kippur, that day where we separate from all worldly pursuits, the day that we're elevated to a status, a level of angels, Baruch Shem Kevod Machuto Olam Ba'ed, out loud, that serves at the once upwards, the rope which we connect ourselves to God, so that we do not fall below, and now we're able to serve our Kadosh Baruch Hu properly, even when we're planted, when we're grounded, when we're in the sukkah, eating and drinking and sleeping the sukkot, using the 7 traits 7 times downwards. And now it makes a lot of sense why the Kohen Gadol specifically preceded every number with the number 1. 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 5, 1 and 6, 1 and 7. Because to show us that we have to constantly be connected to the one above, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through each one of our 7 character traits, this traits of ourselves, the traits of the world below. And if we don't do that, God forbid, if we don't, we're in danger of allowing that koach, that midah, to the Yetzer Hara to grab that midah and allow us to stumble into sin with the 7 names. By the way, on a side point, the Gemara asks an interesting question, but it makes a lot of sense now. Question Masechet Megillah, the Gemara asks, where do we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu called Yaakov the El, Aleph Lamed? Where do we know that? And it quotes a pasuk in Sefer Bereshit, Vayikra Shema El Elohei Yisrael. That's what the pasuk brings. What does this mean that God called Yaakov El? What does this mean? What's the Gemara trying to ask? So based on what we said, Yaakov was the person who personified this idea of tying himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we said, Yaakov Chever Nachalato. That's what this week's parasha says. Yaakov Chever Nachalato, because he tied himself. That rope was connected so tightly, every strand to his neshama, directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to the point where he was called Aleph Lamed, which is one of the names of God. What does Aleph Lamed stand for? Achat Lemala. Achat Lemala, 1 upwards, which is that rope that was going on. To say that Yaakov's strength in holiness was his connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu above, so as not to fall below. I want to provide you guys here tonight, and those listening online, those listening later on the recording, a couple of ideas based on what we just said, things that we do all the time, that is very much connected to this notion of achat lemala v'sheva lemata. Two specific things I'm thinking about that we can apply to every day. Number 1 is the mitzvah of tefillin. The mitzvah of tefillin, this idea of achat lemala v'sheva lemata, you're probably already thinking you probably know a little bit of what I'm talking about right now. 1 above and 7 downwards is hidden in the tefillin that we put on every day. The Chatam Sofer says he writes in his sefer what the proper kavanah should be when a person has his tefillin on. So I want to tell you what he writes. Unbelievable. Listen to what he says over here. Ma shemanichim tefillah shel yad neged alev techila umvarachim leaniach. That which place the arm tefillin first, lined up with the heart, right? The arm tefillin is, when you put your arm down, it's supposed to line up with your heart. And you say the beracha leaniach tefillin. Veshuv, and then only afterwards, shel rosh, you put on your head, umvarechim al mitzvat, that's Ashkenazi custom is to recite a second beracha, al mitzvat tefillin. Mipnei shu gmar ha-mitzvah, that is the conclusion of the mitzvah. Yesh lomar, he said, we can explain this al derech mashal, by means of a parable. Bnei medina sheratzu lehamlich alehem melech. The people of the land wanted to appoint a king over them. And they wanted you're going to be our king. You're going to rule over us. You're going to direct us. You're going to be our leader. Amar lahem hamelech. The king told him, wait, 1 second. Batehila first, isru bezikim et ploni hame'arer malchut. First, you need to lock up all the people who were arguing against having a king in the first place. You got to put them in jail. Afterwards, I'll be your king. You can place me as your king. Nami, says the Khatam Sofer. Hareshaim birshut libam haolchim bishrirut libam hara. Wicked people are subject to their heart's desires. Ve'asadikim, the libam birshut sichlam ubirshut nishmatam. The tzadikim, on the other hand, their heart is given over to their intellect. It's given to their soul. Alken, therefore, terem sheyaniach tefillin atara al hamoach. Before you put the tefillin as a crown on your head, on your brain, which is, by the way, where the soul is, le'akdisho kodesh kodashim, to make it sanctified on the holiest levels. Tzarich techila le'esor bezikim hame'arer al hamelucha. First, you have to tie up that which questions the kingship. Hainu halev, which is your heart, because that's where the desires come from, the lev. V'tzarich le'aniach tefillin neged libo. You have to put the tefillin here on your arm, next to your heart. Sheyeh kasur ve'isur bezikeh kedusha. So that you tie up in the bounds of holiness. You're not letting them move. And then you put the tefillin on the head. Shlomo HaMelech writes in Kohelet, Lev chacham limino. A wise man's heart is to the right. Lev kesil lismolo. But a foolish man's heart is to the left. What does this mean? So Midrash says, Lev chacham limino, the wise man's heart is to the right, is zu yetzer ha'tov. This is the good inclination. And the fool man's heart to the left, ze yetzer hara. This is the evil inclination. Which means that the good inclination is located in the right chamber of the heart, and the evil inclination is located in the left chamber of the heart. And this is what the Chachamim, another explanation, what the Chachamim say, Ve'afta Hashem Elohecha bechol levavecha, like Rashi said, Bishnei yetzarecha, with your two inclinations, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, because both are found in the heart. Both are there. One's on the right, and one's on the left. So the reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to place our tefillin, shel yad, on the left arm, again, for most of the world that are righties, we have to put it on the weaker arm. Why do we put it on the left arm? Because it's next to the left chamber of the heart. Because the left chamber of the heart is that of the Yetzer Hara. It's in order to subjugate the evil inclination which is found in the left chamber of the heart. And then what do? After we put it here, we then wrap. We're binding. That's what tefillah means, tefillin. We're binding. How many times? 7 times. We're binding 7 times to tie up the 7 evil forces those forces that belong to the Yetzer Hara, it's all connected. The forces are preventing us from allowing ourselves to realize HaKadosh Baruch Hu is king. Like the king said, now before you make me king, you got to jail those guys. Those ones who are threatening, who are going to threaten my kingdom. You got to tie them up. And only after you tie them up, then you take the Rosh. And you put the Rosh above, right here, above the brain, in order to connect ourselves. The Hat Lemala. Once above. And that's the meaning. The Tefillin Shel Rosh is a Hat Lemala. And the Tefillin Shel Yad is the Sheva Lemata, that the 7 wrappings around the arm correspond to this idea of Sheva Lemata. And the purpose of this is to sanctify himself the entire day. Let's not forget that back in the olden days, they wore tefillin all day. We're not on the level anymore to do so. So we, outside of tefillah, we have to take it off. Many of us probably should be taking it off a lot sooner, right? That's what goes on in the Bet Knesset. Okay, but nevertheless, back then, it was constantly, your whole day was with tefillin, because you're constantly thinking of Hashem. First thing you do is strangle that Yetzer Hara, and then allow the one above, the Echat Lemala, that will serve as a protection from allowing us to fall into the depths and the pits of the 7 times below. And even if the Yetzer Hara again succeeds, Sheva Yipol Tzadik Vekam. Right? 7 times you fall, but don't worry, he'll get back up. So one connection of this whole Achat Lemala, Sheva Lemata, is the mitzvah of tefillin. But there's one more mitzvah that we do that is also very much connected to this idea. The mitzvah of Shabbat, the weekly, holy, special day of Shabbat. Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Lamed Vav, Seif Aleph, that it is prohibited to wear tefillin on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Ever ask yourself, why don't I wear tefillin on Shabbat? Every day of the week I wear tefillin. Shabbat I don't wear tefillin. Why not? If anything, it's even holy. It's holier than a Monday. It's holier than. So why can't I wear tefillin on Shabbat? So Shulchan Aruch tells us the answer. He says, because Shabbat is a sign in of itself. Like we say in the Piyut, Ki yesh mina Shabbat el yishmereni, ot is a sign. Ot hi le'ol me'ad beno beni. It's a sign. If I was to don tefillin, which is also an ot, v'haya le'ot al yadecha, utot avod b'necha. If I was to don on Shabbat another sign, on Shabbat, that's a degradation to Shabbat. To basically say, okay, Shabbat, your sign isn't good enough. So I'm going to just put on another sign. It's an embarrassment to Shabbat. And that's why we don't wear tefillin on Shabbat. But maybe we can understand what the Shulchan Aruch is trying to say as follows. The 7 days of creation correspond to those 7 traits that we spoke about. Chesed, Geburah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. Each day another trait, which are the 7 times downwards, which a person can fall through with the Yetzer Hara and the 7 forces of impurity, like we said. In order to channel these midot, these traits for the service of Hashem, we said we have to be connected to God. We have to be connected with that rope to the one above, to the Chat Lemala, not to fall into the Sheva Lemata. So what did Hashem do? With His unbelievable compassion and kindness and mercy, He gave us a gift. And that gift, Ubayom HaShevi'i, Shabbat Vaynafash, the 7th day. The 7th day of Shabbat is a gift, a holy day where we are prohibited to do any type of work, to enable us again to separate ourselves from all types of worldly pursuits in order to connect to Hashem through Torah, through Tefillah, through Piyutim, and yes, even through food as well. And through that, through celebrating and honoring the Shabbat, we're now able to acquire a shmirah, a protection for all 7 days of the week, including Shabbat itself, which we are also obligated on a Shabbat to enjoy delightful worldly pleasures. So it turns out then that Shabbat becomes the achat lemala. Shabbat is the once upwards that connects us to Hashem above, which ensures the protection of Sheva lemata, 7 downwards, the 7 days of the week, also including Shabbat. That's what the Zohar says. Razad de Shabbat, ihi Shabbat itchada berazad de echad. Through Shabbat, Am Yisrael merits to bind himself with the Chad, berazad de echad, with the holiness of God, the one of God. So now we know why a person is not allowed to wear tefillin on Shabbat. Shabbat in of itself is an ot. It's a sign through which we bind the 7 traits below with the one above. It's like the tefillin. That's exactly what we're doing. If a person was to put on his tefillin, shel yad, and rosh, binding the 7 traits of his heart, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on Shabbat, you're belittling the Shabbat. Well, how can you do that? Shabbat in of itself has the capacity to do that. That's the whole purpose of it. And now you're putting on the tefillin to serve the same purpose? You're embarrassing the day. You're embarrassing the gift that he gave you. So you also have the mitzvah of Shabbat, which very beautifully corresponds to achat lemala vesheva lemata. Rabotai, this is why we end Yom Kippur with the practice of saying the pesukim. The first 2 pesukim is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad and Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. 2 pesukim which declare the achat lemala, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one and above, Hashem Echad, that's the achat lemala. And then we say Hashem Hu Elokim how many times? 7 times. It's 1, achat lemala v'sheva lemata. The 7 times. The purpose of saying Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem is to connect ourselves with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then right afterwards, we say Hashem Hu Elokim 7 times, corresponding to the 7 traits, in order to dedicate their use solely and specifically for serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And through that we join ourselves. Ke'ilu, we're the Kohen Gadol, we're with him. Can you imagine now what the tefillin means on a day-to-day basis and what Shabbat means on a week-to-week basis? It's like we're replicating the avodah, the service of the Kohen Gadol every single day or every single week, if it's Shabbat. That's how holy it is, our tefillin that we put on, and the Shabbat, the beauty of Shabbat that we observe. And that's the idea, that's what's behind the Kohen Gadol going in there. Achat lemala, sheva lemata. I want to wish all of our listeners, I want to wish all of you coming out today, a gemar chatima tova, and may the tefillot that we say tomorrow night and then on Thursday go straight to Shamayim, achat lemala, with no breaks, and it will allow us to build that rope, to strengthen that rope that we tie around us, and we'll build ourselves into be true servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Gmar chatima tova lekulam. Have a wonderful evening.